I'm so happy you're here. I am descending back to Earth. I am returning to my home planet. Couldn't be more excited to be returning home. Hope it's still standing. We'll find out. But I wanted to use my final descent to say a few more words about my course, Data Science for Everyone, that I taught at NYU for many years with these wonderful co-instructors. In particular, on our final descent back to planet Earth, I thought I would talk about how we go about returning to our roots where we started the semester and think about making inferences about the real world, the world that's right out there behind us, from the data that we've so thoughtfully collected and analyzed and interpreted. So, in order to do this, we need to go back to our roots of all roots of thinking really hard about what we're doing, why we're doing it, and whether we actually can learn anything about the data science analyses that we've conducted. So, really, more appropriately, I should call this Challenges 2, making inferences about the real world. I've never had a knack for pithy titles. So off we go, shall we? All right. So speaking of roots, let's think back to the early days of this course. If this is the first video you're watching, this is a wild summary of a lot of the themes that we've covered. If you have watched all the videos, send me a message and tell me. I will send you a diploma or a medal or a piece of moon rock. Data doesn't say anything. That is the thing that we said early on in the course. We're revisiting it again today. Shout it from the rooftops. Data doesn't say anything. Humans say things about data that we decided to collect using human design tools with methods we decided were appropriate and then analyzed with methods we thought were best for the problem we were working on. And then we interpreted all of it into conclusions about the real world, and we hope to do things like better understand it, predict it, influence it. Now, just a few examples of some of the ways that human thinking has mattered this semester over this video series. We wondered at various points about confounders. We wondered about endogeneity. We wondered about selection bias. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, we have videos about all of these things, but join me for now. We're going to keep building here. Selecting on the dependent variable, survivorship bias, p-levels. How many independent variables should we have in our models? Are we committing an ecological fallacy? Is there a linear relationship between our variables? Are we making a type 1 or a type 2 error? Have we committed errors of exclusion, errors of validity? What's the R squared? Is it high enough? Is it too high? What percentage test versus train should we split our data into? Measurement. Did we do it right? What value for K should we use? All of these questions and many more are things that at various points of inflection in our analyses, we've said, well, we kind of don't know for sure. We have to think about it really hard. And much to the dismay of my students over the years and the dismay of many Earthlings down here, other planets have a higher tolerance for ambiguity, by the way, one thing I've learned in my travels. There is almost never a hard and fast rule about any of these. And in fact, if someone asserts there's a hard and fast rule, I wouldn't trust them. We're going to add 2 more bricks to our wall. We're going to add 2 more bricks. We're going to add the base rate fallacy and conditioning on a collider. All right. So these are the bricks in the wall of thinking about our data. So I want to share with you before we part ways, the best diagram I've ever made in my entire life. We've looked at a lot of diagrams. Wow. This is how data science works. We have a big, wide, complex world. We do our data science project, and then we look out upon the world and we say, have we learned anything? That is what we do in data science. And in order to fully evaluate if we've learned anything, I want to add 2 more bricks to our wall of inference. First up, the base rate fallacy. Let me also say at this stage, these are not trivial matters to think about. And I end on them because I do believe it's important to have some humility as we go to say, look, what we see in data is not necessarily, or what we naturally intuitively conclude from data may not necessarily reflect the real world. And there's all kinds of motivated reasoning and biases. This is also known as base rate neglect. This is when, if we are provided with individuating information and base rate information, we tend to assign greater value to the specific information and ignore the base rate information rather than combine the two. Basically, this boils down to, why are we not persuaded by data when it ought to be persuasive? So this is very, very common. It's documented in all humans everywhere. None of us are immune from it. Individuating information means information specific to a person or an event. So jiayu, it's tall. Individuating information. My base rate information is objective statistical information, such as 529 out of 329 million people in the United States are NBA players. Thus, the probability that any random person we meet on Earth is an NBA player is something like 0.016%. This is also known as our prior. But too often when we run into a tall person, we say, oh, you're tall. You must be a basketball player. Shout out to my tall people. I am not tall, but I feel for you and this particular occurrence. We are committing a base rate fallacy in this instance. The odds that anyone is a basketball player are so overwhelmingly small. Any random person we meet, no matter how tall they are, it makes no sense to say, oh, you must be a basketball player. Animations are still coming in hot though, right? Here's another example that I really like. Steve is shy. Is Steve a salesperson or a librarian? Well, we say, librarians are shy. Therefore, Steve must be a librarian. When in fact, way more people on Earth are salespeople compared to librarians. Maybe too bad. Maybe that's part of the problem. From this vantage point, I really get a good glimpse on Earth. The cognitive error of the base rate fallacy means that all of us walking around in the world put too little weight on the base. So overall, the company's doing well. Overall, vaccines are effective. Overall, sea levels are rising. And we put way too much focus on the new individual piece of information. Poor performance this quarter. Breakthrough cases. A cold spell. There must not be climate change. So what do we do about the base rate fallacy? Some ideas. One, be aware that this is the heuristic. We almost always, and there are all kinds of biases in here. The brand new information, it's more alarming information. It's probably what someone is emphasizing when they're telling you about this information. So be aware that our heuristic is to latch onto that, and that will help you notice it as you do it. And really, more than anything, I say this to all of you as you go out and do data science out there in the world, as you communicate your results, be aware that this is a way that people often are going to interpret what you're talking about, and maybe get ahead of it and say, hey, I'm presenting this information. You may be tempted to conclude based on this, that this is what's happening, but let's keep in mind the broader picture. One final example for you from everyone's favorite XKCD. So remember, right-handed people commit 90% of all base rate errors. And what's going on here? Of course, 90% of people are right-handed, and there's probably no relationship between handedness and base rate errors, though as a left-handed person, I think maybe they're onto something. Like I said, data doesn't say anything. Up next, we are going to condition on a collider, the final and most brain agonizing challenge to inference that we're going to cover in this course. Conditioning on a collider is a new third variable problem. A confounder, you may recall from our simpler days of yore, was a missing third variable that exerts an influence on both X and Y. For example, we might find, hey, I see a correlation between shoe size and spelling ability. Okay, but age is a confounding variable that influences both our shoe size and our spelling ability. We get a distorted association when we fail to control for a confounder. When we don't consider age, we wrongly conclude that there's some magical, important, meaningful relationship between shoe size and spelling ability. So a confounder exerts an influence on both X and Y. To give one more example, suppose we find a correlation between taking regular yoga classes and self-reported happiness. We might be tempted to say yoga causes happiness. As someone who goes to yoga and whose mother is a yoga teacher, I like to think that it does cause happiness, but we should consider the possibility of confounders. For example, having enough disposable income to be able to afford to go to yoga classes, or having enough free time to be able to go to yoga classes, might be something to consider. And having enough disposable income or free time might also be contributing to happiness. So it could be that yoga causes happiness, but it could be that we're just actually picking up some underlying confounder, such as income or spare time, or really both. On the other hand, I refer to a collider as the evil cousin to the confounder. It's a missing third variable that is causally influenced by X and Y. So, for example, research has shown that there is no correlation between the high school GPA that someone has and the SAT score among college students. So we look at college students and we say, hey, what was their high school GPA? Hey, what was their SAT score from the SATs they took before they came to college? And we say, gosh, there's no correlation. I thought SAT scores should reflect something about what people are learning. I'm kind of surprised by that. Right, but we have specifically only looked at college students. We've selected for college students. So what we're getting is a distorted association when we control for a collider. This could take the form of no association when there really is one, such as in this example, but it could also take the form of, say, a flipped association. For example, a negative when it's really a positive, or vice versa. So to illustrate a way a collider might operate, suppose we have our X and our Y and we're examining a correlation or an existence of a correlation or association between them, but we are controlling for some third variable that is a collider. So in the case of GPA, we have students who we have the data on their GPA, we have what their SAT scores were, and we say, oh gosh, no correlation. But that's because we are only considering, in this case, a sample of college students. So we've selected for college students, we've controlled for college students. Therefore, we are misrepresenting, we are distorting the actual correlation between those two things. Let's do another example. Suppose we say, wow, I'm studying the relationship between yoga and happiness, and I don't find a relationship at all. No correlation, truly? Well, that flies in the face of any knowledge I've had about yoga. Well, maybe I'm not finding a relationship because I've only surveyed people at a wellness retreat. Maybe being interested in yoga causes me to go to a wellness retreat, or maybe being interested in being happier causes me to go to a wellness retreat. So, to put this in more words than we need, and I'm going to keep giving you examples of this, we are conditioning on a collider when we only consider observations that have some third variable in common. For example, college students. Or when we control for a variable that is a collider. For example, if we include everyone, but then control for college students, say with a dummy variable in our analysis. You may come across this called slightly different names. So we've got Bergson's paradox or Bergson's bias or fallacy, endogenous selection bias, selection distortion effect. It's been talked about in a number of different ways, but not talked about enough. So why are we getting a distorted correlation? Let's go back to the GPA SAT example. So suppose I'm looking at all the college students in my university and I'm saying, wow, their high school GPA and their SAT scores ought to be correlated if SAT and GPA are measuring what we think they're measuring. We don't see a correlation. Aha, but we've conditioned on the collider of college students. You might admit students on the basis of a very high GPA. You also might admit students on the basis of a very high SAT score. Many students may have both. Okay. Very few students you admit to your college will have neither. But it might be the case that you admit some students who have a very high GPA despite having a low SAT score, or who have a high SAT score but a low GPA. And in fact, you are selecting them into the body of being college students in a way that exactly offsets that correlation that actually is out there in the world. So you're conditioning on a collider. You're considering just one subset of the population in such a way that it makes it look like there's no correlation when in fact there is. It hurts everyone's brain. So what do we do if we think we might be conditioning on a collider? Honestly, the hardest part for now, because it is really not talked about enough, is recognizing the problem, just knowing to look for this. There have been many cases where we didn't know to look for it and we drew faulty conclusions about the world because we didn't realize we were conditioning on a collider. One strategy to see if you are conditioning on a collider is to draw a picture, a causal diagram. These are called directed acyclic graphs or DAGs. Awesome. They're a way of displaying the researcher's assumptions about the relationship between variables. So when we draw them, we'll draw a few right now. Nodes are our variables. So for example, I have a variable z, and I have a variable x, and I have a variable y. An edge is a line connecting one variable or node to another. And we're going to draw directed edges. So a directed edge is a line with an arrow indicating the direction of the assumed causal relationship. And I think, based on my theory and thinking about the world, that z influences x. And I think that x influences y. Ta-da! I've drawn a directed acyclic graph. If there's no line, there's an assumption of no causal effect between the variables. I could draw my model in another way. What if I say, no, that's not how I think my pieces in my model go together. I think z affects x and z affects y. Aha. But then y affects a. I can draw it as complicated as I want. The flow of information is going to go from the past to the future effects along the arrow. So z is going to kick off x and y, and then y is going to give rise to a. Directed means all the variables are connected by arrows. So we have arrows in each of our lines. Acyclic means that no paths turn back on the parent node. So a couple of examples. I might think that smoking causes lung cancer. There's my DAG for that one. I might think that stress causes me to smoke more and separately causes lung cancer. So that's a confounder. Maybe I'll say I think stress causes smoking and lung cancer. So we do have a confounder, but I'm only studying patients in a hospital. And so I see that there's actually no correlation between smoking and lung cancer. And I think, oh my gosh, maybe Mad Men was onto something. The problem is that there are many people in a hospital who are there for health reasons related to smoking that are not lung cancer, emphysema, whatever. And people who are there for treatment for lung cancer who were never smokers. You can get lung cancer without having been a smoker. So it might look like we don't have a relationship between smoking and lung cancer because people are in a hospital in a way that exactly offsets the real correlation that's out there in the world. I'm telling you, my students hate this unit. It really is hard to think about, but it really is an important way to remember that what we think we're observing in the data may not actually be a reflection of real life. We need to think about what this data is, where it's from, who we're looking at. So this has been just a few examples of how human thinking has mattered this semester. These last two are doozies. I purposely leave you with it because it's really important to remember we are all limited in our ability to learn from data. We are up against serious cognitive challenges, methodological challenges. We are up against all kinds of issues with research design. Data science is not perfect. Data science is messy. Yes, it's rigorous. Yes, it's precise, but it's not really something where there are hard and fast rules. It's very rare that you'll have a case where you say, this is the way to do it. It's all about embracing uncertainty, trying different things, testing different hypotheses, and being humble at the end about what you've learned, what you may not have learned, and how you can improve your study going forward. So thank you so much for watching. I'm so honored that you spent time with me. Get in touch, show me what you're working on, ask me the questions that you have. But for now, the horses from the horses data set and I bid you a hearty farewell, and we will see you back on planet Earth very soon. Thanks again for joining us.